Hi, I'm Chloe, I'm 24. And I've spent most of my life feeling like a disappointment to my family. My parents never seemed proud of anything I did, and my siblings always found a way to make me feel small. But one day, everything changed when I discovered something shocking about them that shook me to my core. I want to share my story with you. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family drama and emotional courage. The morning started like any other, but I could already feel the tension in the house as I walked into the kitchen. My name is Chloe, I'm 24, and growing up in a small town meant that everyone knew each other. But my family made me feel like I didn't even exist. My parents sat at the table, coffee in hand, but instead of greeting me, they were whispering and glancing in my direction with that familiar expression. Disappointment wrapped in thinly veiled annoyance. I had already tripped over the hallway rug on my way in, spilling a little orange juice onto the floor. Instead of a simple "be careful" or "it's okay," my mother's sharp voice cut through the air like ice. "Chloe, can you ever do anything right? You're always making a mess. Honestly, sometimes I wonder why we even try." My stomach sank. I froze, feeling the weight of their judgment before even taking a step closer. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, but the words caught in my throat. There was no room in this house for failure, at least not for me. My father shook his head and muttered under his breath, loud enough for me to hear. "She'll never amount to anything, mark my words." My younger sister smirked from the corner, clearly enjoying my discomfort. It wasn't just today. Every small mistake, every clumsy moment, every failure, real or imagined, was stored in their minds like a permanent mark against me. I remember trying to help set the table when I was 12, and my efforts were laughed at because I had arranged the plates unevenly. I had hoped maybe this time at 24 things would be different. But I was wrong. I moved quietly to pour myself some cereal, trying to keep my hands steady, when the milk carton slipped. The sound of it hitting the counter was enough to draw my mother's glare, which felt like it could pierce right through me. "Chloe," she snapped, "why can't you do anything without messing it up?" I wanted to disappear right then and there. I wanted the floor to swallow me up and erase every mistake I had ever made. But instead I forced myself to pick up the carton, clean the spill and smile politely, all while feeling completely hollow inside. Even outside of the house, the world seemed to remind me of my place. At work, I was constantly overlooked for small promotions, not because I lacked the ability, but because everyone, including my boss, had seen my family's endless criticism. They assumed if my family treated me like a failure, I must be incapable. That belief followed me like a shadow, quiet but persistent, and it was exhausting. I remember walking down the quiet streets of our small town that morning, the dew on the grass sparkling under the weak sunlight, and feeling an ache in my chest. The neighborhood kids waved at my younger siblings when they went to school, but nobody waved at me. Not because I didn't exist to them, but because I had been taught that I was invisible. My parents didn't mean to make me feel that way, I suppose, but the effect was the same. By noon, I had gone through multiple minor humiliations. I tried to offer my input during a family discussion about weekend plans, only to be met with a dismissive "Chloe, we already decided, you wouldn't understand." My father barely looked up from his phone, and my mother rolled her eyes. I felt like a ghost trapped in my own home, a shadow moving through a space that belonged entirely to everyone else. I retreated to my room, the one small place that felt remotely mine. As I closed the door behind me, I leaned against it and let out a shaky breath. That was when it hit me fully. No one in this house expected me to succeed, to be smart, or to have anything meaningful to say. My presence alone was a problem, a source of irritation. Even my own laughter had been dismissed in the past as annoying or childish. Sitting on my bed, I stared at the faded posters on the wall, remnants of dreams I had long abandoned. A ticket stub from a summer concert, a certificate from a high school writing contest, a photo of me holding a science project I had spent weeks perfecting, only to have it ridiculed by my parents. Each object carried a memory, a reminder of how many times I had tried and failed in their eyes. I remembered one of the most painful moments from my teenage years. I had saved up my allowance to buy paint and brushes, hoping to create a piece that could be displayed at a local art fair. My father had walked into the room, looked at the half-finished canvas and said flatly, "Why bother, Chloe? You'll never be good at that." The words had crushed me, but the memory still lingered today, fresh and raw, as though they were happening again. That afternoon, I decided to try something small but daring. I texted a coworker, someone I trusted, asking if they needed help with a project. It was just a simple favor, but the idea of putting myself out there, even in such a tiny way, made my heart race. I knew my parents would mock me if they found out, but I didn't care in that moment. I needed to prove to myself that I could be seen even if no one else acknowledged it. But even as I left my house to meet my coworker, my family's voices lingered in my mind like background noise I couldn't escape. My mother's sharp tones, my father's constant disapproval, my sister's sarcastic laughter. It all blended into a chorus of doubt that I had been carrying for years. Every step I took outside felt heavier because of it, but I forced myself forward anyway. By the time I arrived at the small cafe where we were supposed to meet, I was shaking, not just from nerves, but from the emotional weight of decades of being dismissed. My coworker smiled warmly and thanked me for coming, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of validation. It was fleeting, but it reminded me that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't invisible everywhere. Later that evening, I returned home with a mix of exhaustion and cautious hope. The house was quiet, my parents engrossed in television, oblivious to my small victory outside. I realized that being invisible at home didn't have to define my entire life. That thought stayed with me as I got ready for bed, a small ember of determination lighting up the darkness that had long enveloped my self-esteem. As I lay down, I reflected on the day in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before. Every criticism, every eye roll, every dismissive comment, they weren't facts about who I was. They were reflections of other people's limitations. That realization, subtle but powerful, planted the first real seed of rebellion in my heart. I didn't need my family's approval to be valuable. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about the countless times I had felt small, unworthy, invisible. But now, for the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of something different. A quiet resolve that this would not define me forever. I knew it was only the beginning of a long journey, but it was a beginning I had never dared to imagine. By the end of that night, as the house settled into silence, I whispered to myself, almost like a promise, one day they'll see me for who I really am. And it won't just be by chance. They'll have no choice but to notice. That day, the day I felt invisible, became the day my quiet defiance was born. A seed that would grow into something unstoppable in the chapters to come. After that night in my room, when I had quietly promised myself I would no longer let my family define me, life didn't suddenly get easier. If anything, reality hit harder. The next morning, I woke up to the familiar hum of the old heater rattling in the corner of my bedroom, and the muffled voices of my parents arguing downstairs. Their words were unintelligible at first, but the tension was thick enough to make my chest tighten. I had started to realize that, even though I was determined to find my own worth, the world around me wouldn't hand it over willingly. I walked to my first job feeling the weight of my parents' criticism still pressed against me like an invisible anchor. It was at the small local grocery store where I had worked part-time since I was 16. Even at 24, I was still washing shelves, stocking produce, and running the cash register, a role I had accepted out of necessity, though it gnawed at my pride. Customers sometimes smiled at me, thanked me for helping, and called me by name, but every compliment felt temporary, fleeting, because I could still hear my family's voices undermining me in my head. One afternoon, while stacking cans in aisle 3, a regular customer complimented my efficiency. "You're really fast today," he said with a nod. I smiled, feeling a flicker of warmth. "Thanks," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, as if the words themselves could confirm my worth. But later that evening, my sister would call me at home just to remind me how slow I was compared to everyone else in the family. Those mixed signals, the world outside showing encouragement and my home showing constant disapproval, became a confusing storm I had to navigate every single day. My first real taste of independence came when I decided to save a portion of my paycheck to buy a second-hand laptop. I wanted it to learn new skills, maybe even take an online course or practice something that could be useful in the future. My parents didn't understand why I needed it. "Why waste money on that?" my father scoffed. "You'll just break it or quit before it matters." That was exactly the kind of remark that stung more than anything, because deep down I doubted myself when I heard it. But I bought it anyway, hiding it in my small room before they could see. With that laptop, I discovered small victories that were mine and mine alone. I learned to use spreadsheet software to track my tiny savings. I practiced typing faster. I explored basic online design programs and realized slowly that I had a knack for organizing things efficiently. These were tiny accomplishments, yes, but they filled the cracks of my confidence in a way nothing else had. I even started helping a coworker, a young man named Derek, create a small spreadsheet for inventory tracking at the store. He looked genuinely impressed. "You're really good at this," he said one day, leaning over my shoulder. I felt a rush of pride that I hadn't experienced in years. This was validation that wasn't rooted in my family's judgment. But just as quickly as these victories appeared, losses followed. A couple of weeks later, Derek forgot to save the spreadsheet we had worked on together, and the file vanished. My heart sank. I tried to hide my frustration, but the disappointment was too real. It was a small, frustrating loss, but it reminded me that the world was full of setbacks, and even my best efforts could be erased in a moment. At home, when I tried to share this minor accomplishment, my mother waved me off. "You're wasting your time with that nonsense," she said. It was the same old line, repeated in different forms for years, and I realized the only person who could truly appreciate my growth was me. I started seeking out more of these small wins, clinging to them like lifelines. I signed up for a local community workshop on bookkeeping, hoping to finally gain a skill that could help me stand out. The first session was terrifying. I walked in, looked around, and saw people my age who seemed so confident, so sure of themselves. I felt like the same awkward teenager I had been in my parents' house, the one who spilled juice and never did anything right. But I forced myself to sit down and focus. By the end of the session, I had completed the first small exercise perfectly. The instructor smiled at me and said, "Good job, Chloe. Keep it up." For a moment, I allowed myself to feel successful. Then came the next challenge: balancing work, my new workshop, and family life. It felt like an impossible juggling act. One evening, I returned from the workshop to find my father in a foul mood because I hadn't cleaned the kitchen thoroughly before leaving. "Do you even care about this house?" he barked. I wanted to scream to defend myself, but I only nodded and quietly washed the dishes. That night, lying in bed, I questioned whether all my efforts outside the house were worth it. Could I ever break free of the constant disapproval that followed me like a shadow? Despite the constant pushback, small wins continued to accumulate, quietly building my confidence. I began taking on more responsibilities at work, suggesting ways to improve inventory flow, and helping train new employees. Each time my suggestions were implemented, I felt a small spark of recognition. I noticed my coworkers starting to treat me differently, not with pity but with respect. Even small gestures like a colleague bringing me a coffee or thanking me for my help felt monumental. Yet losses were always lurking, waiting for the perfect moment. One day, a major shipment arrived at the store, and I was in charge of checking it in. I worked tirelessly, triple-checking everything, but a single case was mislabeled. My manager didn't yell, but the disappointed look on his face mirrored every look my parents had ever given me. That evening, my father commented casually, "I hope that was the last mistake you make at work. People will laugh if you keep messing up." The words cut deeper than any manager's glance could. I realized that no matter how many wins I achieved, the constant judgment at home threatened to nullify every ounce of progress. There were moments of quiet rebellion, too. I started keeping a small notebook where I documented my daily wins and losses. Every positive comment, every tiny success at work or during workshops I wrote down. When something went wrong, I would jot that too, but I started to analyze it, not as a reflection of my worth but as a lesson. This simple act gave me a sense of control. Even when my parents dismissed me or my coworkers doubted me, I had a record of my progress, a tangible reminder that I was learning, growing, and moving forward. Friendship became another lifeline during this period. My coworker Derek, who had once complimented my spreadsheet skills, became a subtle source of encouragement. We would meet for coffee after shifts and discuss small ways to improve the store's operations or personal projects. For the first time in years, I felt like someone genuinely saw me, not as a failure but as capable. These interactions, small as they were, reminded me that validation didn't have to come from my family to be meaningful. Then came a moment that tested my resilience. A local fundraiser at the grocery store required volunteers to coordinate donations and sort items for the community. I volunteered, hoping to prove to myself that I could handle responsibility. But a series of miscommunications left me scrambling at the last minute. Packages were mislabeled, and I feared I would be publicly humiliated. My heart pounded as I corrected mistakes on the fly, sweat dripping from my brow, praying no one would notice my panic. By the end of the day, everything was sorted. The event was a success, and several community members thanked me personally. I felt proud, but at home my parents barely noticed, consumed by their own trivial concerns. Still, I had survived the chaos and triumphed in a way that mattered to me. Evenings became a mix of exhaustion and reflection. I would collapse on my bed, thinking about the day's small victories and setbacks. I remembered my spilled juice in the morning, the praise from Derek, the workshop exercise, and the fundraiser. Each event, each moment was a building block, slowly reshaping my sense of self. I realized that success wasn't about grand gestures or recognition from my family. It was about perseverance, learning, and quietly proving to myself that I was capable. The pattern of small wins and losses continued for months. I learned to celebrate private victories, like mastering a new spreadsheet formula, or helping a coworker complete a task efficiently. I also learned to navigate setbacks with less self-blame. Each time something went wrong, I reminded myself that it was an opportunity to learn, not a reflection of my value. Slowly, I began to feel a sense of pride that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. By the end of that period, I could see subtle changes in myself. I walked taller, spoke with more confidence, and even laughed more freely. My parents still criticized me, and my siblings still teased, but their words no longer had the same paralyzing effect. I had discovered that even amidst small-town struggles, low-paying jobs, and constant judgment, I could find moments of success, and those moments mattered. I started to envision a future where I could build on these small wins, where losses were temporary hurdles rather than definitive statements about my worth. For the first time, I felt a quiet sense of empowerment. I knew that every late-night spreadsheet session, every volunteering effort, every minor victory outside the house was laying the foundation for something larger. A life that was mine to define. The small wins and big losses taught me an invaluable lesson. Success doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers quietly in the moments no one notices, in the skills you master, in the mistakes you recover from, and in the confidence you slowly build. And though my family still saw me as a failure, I was learning to see myself differently. That period of struggle became the invisible armor I carried into every day thereafter. A reminder that progress wasn't about perfection. It was about resilience, determination, and the courage to continue, even when recognition was scarce. I was beginning to understand that the journey mattered as much as the destination, and every small win, no matter how minor it seemed, was proof that I was capable of more than anyone had ever believed. The days after I began noticing small victories outside the constant judgment of my family, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and quiet exhilaration. I knew I was learning to survive in a world that hadn't always been kind to me, but I also realized I was still missing something. A sense of uniqueness, a spark that could finally define me on my own terms. I had been moving forward, but I hadn't yet discovered the part of me that could shine in a way that no one could ignore. It started on a rainy afternoon when I was walking home from the grocery store, my coat dripping and shoes soaked. The streets were nearly empty, and the rhythmic tapping of the rain against the sidewalk somehow felt comforting. I had been experimenting with basic design tools on my laptop, inspired by the spreadsheet work I had learned and my growing confidence in organizing and problem-solving. I decided to try creating a simple flyer for a friend who was hosting a small neighborhood fundraiser. Nothing professional, just something to attract attention. As I opened the software and started dragging elements around, adjusting colors and trying to make it visually appealing, I felt a rush of unexpected excitement. It was more than organizing numbers or volunteering for tasks. It was creating something that was uniquely mine. My fingers moved almost instinctively, guided by a sense of composition I didn't know I had. The colors worked, the text flowed naturally, and the overall design looked better than I could have imagined. When I showed it to my friend, they gasped. "Chloe, this looks amazing. Did you make this yourself?" I nodded, a blush creeping up my cheeks. The compliment hit me harder than any praise at work ever had. It wasn't just recognition. It was validation of something I hadn't realized I possessed. For once, I wasn't being compared to anyone else. This was purely me, my creativity, my skill. I began to experiment more. Evenings that used to be spent scrolling through social media or replaying every small failure in my head were now devoted to design projects. I created mock advertisements, digital posters, and even small graphics for local events. Each completed project left me feeling a mix of pride and disbelief. I was creating tangible work, something I could point to and say, I made this. But discovering this talent didn't come without its challenges. My first attempt to show my parents ended in dismissal. "Why are you wasting your time on that nonsense?" my mother said, barely glancing at the screen. My father, muttering under his breath, added, "Stick to your job at the store. Stop chasing useless hobbies." Their words were familiar, a reminder of the barriers I had always faced. Instead of feeling defeated, though, I began to realize that their opinions no longer had to dictate my path. I was creating for myself, not for their approval. Encouraged by this thought, I decided to take a small leap of faith. I offered to make a flyer for a local coffee shop that needed help advertising its weekly events. It wasn't much, just a simple design to hang in the window, but I treated it like a serious project. I spent hours adjusting fonts, experimenting with color palettes, and ensuring that the layout was clean and visually appealing. When the shop owner saw it, their eyes widened. "This is incredible, Chloe. Can you do more? Maybe design our menu or some social media posts." I felt my heart pound in my chest. This was real validation from someone outside my circle, someone who wasn't obligated to notice me. For the first time, I realized that this hidden talent I had stumbled upon wasn't just a hobby. It could be a lifeline. A way to step into a world where my work mattered, where my skills could speak for me. Even so, I faced setbacks. My first social media post for the coffee shop didn't get as much attention as I had hoped. A few minor errors slipped past me, and I felt the sting of disappointment. I wanted to hide it, to give up and retreat to the safety of my room, but a voice inside me, quiet but persistent, kept pushing. "You've come this far. You can fix it." I spent the night refining the design, adjusting images, and rewriting captions. When the next post went live, the owner smiled at me, noticing the improvement. "That's perfect," they said. And I realized something. Mistakes weren't the end, they were part of learning, part of growth. Around the same time, I joined an online design community, a small forum where beginners and professionals shared work, offered feedback, and challenged each other. At first, I was terrified of posting anything. What if someone ridiculed me? What if I wasn't good enough? But slowly, I started sharing small projects, asking for constructive feedback, and learning from every critique. Each comment, whether praise or correction, became a building block in my growing confidence. I remember one evening as I sat at my desk, scrolling through the forum, a message popped up from someone who had seen my post. "Your layout and color choices are really good. Keep practicing, you're going to go far." It was a stranger, someone who had no connection to my family, no reason to spare me false compliments. And in that moment, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope wasn't immediate transformation. It was subtle. It was in the quiet moments of creation, in the feeling of satisfaction when a project came together, in the recognition that my work could make someone else's life easier or brighter. I began keeping a folder of every completed project, a visual diary of sorts, documenting my progress and achievements. It became tangible proof that I was capable of more than my family had ever allowed themselves to imagine. Evenings at home remained tense, but they started to change in small ways. My sister, who had always mocked my failures, commented once on a flyer I had left casually on the kitchen table. "Hey, this actually looks really good," she said, shrugging as if she couldn't quite believe herself. It was a tiny acknowledgement, but to me it felt monumental. I realized that my family's recognition wasn't necessary for me to feel worthy. It was a bonus, not a prerequisite. The more I explored this talent, the more I discovered about myself. I realized I had patience I hadn't noticed before, the ability to focus for hours, the creativity to combine colors, shapes, and words in ways that felt natural. Each project I completed added layers to my identity, layers that were independent of the criticism I had absorbed for years. For the first time, I felt a sense of ownership over my abilities. Then came a small but pivotal challenge. A local charity asked for volunteers to create promotional materials for a fundraising event. I volunteered immediately, seeing it as an opportunity to test my skills in a high-stakes environment. I spent days designing banners, digital posts, and flyers, staying up late into the night to ensure everything was perfect. On the day of the event, the organizers were stunned. "Chloe, you did all of this? It looks professional," one of them said, clapping me on the back. The validation was overwhelming, but more importantly, it was undeniable. I had a talent that could make a difference, and people genuinely appreciated it. Of course, there were moments of doubt. Late at night, I would replay old criticisms in my mind. "You'll never succeed. You're not talented. You're wasting your time." But each time, I countered those thoughts with evidence from my growing portfolio, from the tangible results of my efforts, from the feedback of strangers who had no reason to flatter me. Slowly, the old voice that had haunted me for years began to fade, replaced by one that whispered, "You are capable. You are creating something valuable." By the time weeks turned into months, I was no longer just experimenting. I was actively building my skill set, taking on projects both for friends and local businesses, refining techniques, and learning new software. Each completed project reinforced the idea that my hidden talent wasn't a fluke. It was a real usable skill that could open doors I hadn't dared imagine before. I even began to think about how this talent could be a path to independence. No longer confined by the limitations my family had imposed on me, I realized I could carve out a life where my abilities were recognized and rewarded. I didn't need extravagant success or fame. I didn't need my parents to validate me. I just needed to keep building, keep practicing, and keep creating. By the end of that period, I could feel a transformation within me. I was more confident, more focused, more patient, and more determined. The hidden talent I had stumbled upon wasn't just about design. It was about resilience, discovery, and self-belief. And though my family still saw me as they always had, I knew in my heart that I was finally stepping into a part of myself they had never acknowledged, a part that would carry me forward in ways I had never imagined. After months of quietly building my skills, I felt a new kind of fire burning inside me, a determination that no one, not even my family, could extinguish. I had discovered my hidden talent, and now I needed to turn it into something that could shape my life. But rising against the shadows of doubt and constant criticism wasn't easy. Every day required pushing past old insecurities that had been carefully layered into me over decades. It started with the smallest of steps, offering to take on more work at the coffee shop. They had been happy with the flyer I made, but I wanted to go further. I suggested redesigning their weekly event boards, updating social media graphics, and even creating a small loyalty card for customers. The owner, Mr. Ramirez, raised an eyebrow at first but agreed cautiously. "Okay, Chloe, let's see what you can do," he said, and I felt a thrill at being trusted, even tentatively. I poured myself into these tasks with obsessive focus. Late nights were spent sketching, researching design trends, and testing layouts. My fingers ached from hours of work, but the exhaustion felt different this time. It was satisfying, not draining. Each completed task, no matter how minor, added to a growing sense of confidence. Slowly, I began to notice a shift in the way people interacted with me. Regular customers started asking me about my projects, complimenting my work, and even seeking advice for their own small ventures. It was a world away from the dismissive, critical environment at home. Yet the shadows were never far behind. My family remained a constant source of pressure and negativity. One evening, I returned home from a long day of work, my arms full of freshly printed flyers and sketches, hoping for a small moment of acknowledgement. Instead, my mother sighed heavily. "Chloe, are you seriously carrying all that nonsense around again? You'll never make a living doing that." My father, reading the paper beside her, added without looking up, "Stick to your day job at the store. Stop wasting your time on these childish projects." Their words stung, but something in me had shifted. I no longer felt crushed. Instead, I felt a quiet, burning defiance. I realized that my struggle was not just about skill building. It was about staking a claim to my own life. I began scheduling my days meticulously. Mornings at the store, afternoons designing, evenings learning new techniques, and late nights reflecting on my progress. I was constructing a life deliberately, leaving no room for the shadows of doubt to take root. Every task, even the mundane ones, was a stepping stone toward independence. Small victories came unexpectedly. One Saturday, a local boutique asked if I could help design a window display for their seasonal collection. I accepted, nervously, fearing they would see me as inexperienced. I spent hours planning the layout, choosing colors, arranging props, and fine-tuning details. When the boutique owner returned to see the finished display, her eyes widened. "Chloe, this is amazing. You've completely transformed our window." That moment, a tangible, undeniable acknowledgement of my talent, was intoxicating. I realized that rising against the shadows wasn't about proving my family wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could create impact and beauty in the real world. But the journey was far from linear. One evening, as I was preparing digital designs for another project, my laptop froze and hours of unsaved work vanished. I felt a wave of panic, frustration, and self-doubt crashing over me. For a moment, the old voice whispered, "See? You're not capable. You're always failing." I wanted to cry, throw the laptop out the window, and retreat into my old familiar shell of invisibility. But instead, I took a deep breath, reminded myself of all the small wins I had achieved, and started again from scratch. The experience was exhausting, yet it taught me resilience. Rising against shadows wasn't just about success. It was about perseverance in the face of setbacks. My evenings at home became exercises in subtle rebellion. I began keeping my projects more private, finishing them quietly before presenting them in contexts where they could be appreciated, like local businesses or online communities. I stopped seeking approval from my parents, knowing their praise would rarely come. The thrill of seeing my designs appreciated elsewhere became a quiet, internal celebration. For the first time, I felt a sense of control over my own narrative. Relationships outside my family also played a crucial role. I befriended Jenna, a graphic designer in a nearby town, through an online forum. We exchanged work, critiqued each other's projects, and shared encouragement late into the night. Her support was different, genuine, unfiltered, and constructive. For the first time, I had someone who truly believed in my abilities, someone whose confidence in me bolstered my own. Those long conversations, sometimes over coffee or through video calls, became lifelines, reminding me that my value wasn't defined by the shadows I was leaving behind. Even small gestures of independence mattered. One day, I convinced a local restaurant to let me redesign their menu boards. It was a modest project, but I approached it with the same seriousness I would a major assignment. I stayed late into the night, perfecting each element, selecting fonts, colors, and layout until everything felt right. The owner's reaction the next morning was priceless. "Chloe, this looks like $1,000,000. You've got real talent." I realized that moments like these weren't just about recognition. They were markers of progress, proof that I was moving beyond the limitations my family had imposed. Yet, for all these victories, the shadows of my past were never fully gone. At home, my father continued his casual dismissals, my mother's sighs remained frequent, and my sister's occasional snide comments pierced deeper than anyone could imagine. One evening, my sister leaned against the doorway while I worked on a complex layout. "You really think anyone cares about this?" she asked sarcastically. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I kept working, letting the completed design speak for itself. When she saw it finished, her eyebrows shot up. "Okay, that's actually good," she muttered, barely audible. I smiled quietly, savoring the silent acknowledgement. Financial independence also became a motivating force. The extra projects I took on began to provide a small but meaningful income. It wasn't enough to leave my job at the store yet, but it gave me leverage, freedom, and a taste of self-sufficiency. For the first time, I felt like I could carve out a life where I was responsible for my own success, rather than waiting for approval or handouts from my family. Each check, each paid invoice became a symbol of my ability to rise above limitations and create my own path. During this period, I also learned the power of subtle strategy. I began documenting my work meticulously, maintaining portfolios of designs, keeping notes on feedback, and tracking improvements. It wasn't just about pride. It was about creating a tangible record that proved my abilities, independent of anyone else's opinion. This process gave me confidence during moments of doubt, serving as a reminder that I was capable of more than anyone in my family had ever given me credit for. Community recognition began to trickle in slowly. A local school invited me to help design posters for an upcoming art exhibit. The faculty and students complimented my work, some asking for tips and guidance. Each interaction, each word of praise, chipped away at the internalized belief that I was destined to be a failure. It became clearer with every project that I had the power to shape perceptions, first of strangers and eventually perhaps even of my family. By the end of this chapter in my life, I could feel a tangible transformation. I was no longer the hesitant, uncertain girl who had once spilled juice in the kitchen and shrunk in the presence of her family's disappointment. I had learned to rise against the shadows, to move forward despite criticism, and to embrace my talent as both a tool and a shield. I had become someone who acted, created, and persisted, even when no one else noticed. Rising against the shadows was not about grand gestures. It was in every completed design, every satisfied client, every late night spent honing skills. It was in quiet victories, in subtle defiance, in claiming my own space and purpose. It was the culmination of months of struggle, learning, and small successes that compounded into something undeniable. I was no longer defined by the doubts of others. I was defining myself. And in the quiet moments when I sat at my desk and watched the city lights flicker outside my window, I realized that the shadows weren't gone. They never would be completely. But I had learned to move through them, to let my light shine where it mattered, and to rise every single day no matter what. The city had settled into a soft hum when I finally realized how far I had come. From the girl who had been overlooked at every family gathering, the one constantly reminded that she was not enough, to someone who quietly, steadily built her own life, I could feel the distance traveled in my bones. The victories weren't loud. They weren't announced at dinner tables or celebrated with grand gestures. They were quiet, deliberate, and deeply personal, but no less significant. It began one crisp Saturday morning when I received an unexpected call from the community center, where I had volunteered months ago. They were hosting a small art and design competition for local youths, and the organizers had seen my prior contributions for the school exhibit and charity events. They asked if I would help judge entries, mentor participants, and showcase a few of my own designs as inspiration. My hands trembled slightly as I accepted. This wasn't just recognition. It was a responsibility, a trust placed in me by people who didn't owe me anything. The morning of the event, I arrived at the center carrying a small portfolio of my recent work. The familiar scent of paper, ink, and acrylic paint filled the air, pulling me back into a memory of my first flyer projects, where the thrill of creation had first taken hold. I glanced around at the eager faces, many of them unsure and tentative, much like I had been when first discovering my talent. I felt a surge of empathy and pride. I wasn't just participating anymore. I was helping shape others' journeys. The judging process was subtle, yet profoundly affirming. As I examined each project, I could see the care, the effort, and the creativity behind every submission. I offered gentle guidance, suggesting minor adjustments, color balance tips, and composition advice. Watching the young artists' eyes light up when I praised their work reminded me of that first compliment from Derek years ago. But this time the satisfaction was multiplied, because I was in a position to give others the kind of validation I had once longed for. During a brief break, I pulled my portfolio out to show a group of aspiring designers. One of the teens, a girl named Lily, leaned in close, whispering, "Did you really do all of this by yourself?" I nodded, smiling, and for a moment I felt a warmth that had little to do with pride and everything to do with acknowledgement from someone who wasn't conditioned to doubt me. The event continued with small conversations, quiet compliments, and tentative steps from participants. Every interaction felt like a proof point. I had built something meaningful, quietly but undeniably, outside the shadow of my family's judgment. Returning home that evening, I found the usual tension awaiting me. My parents were arguing over some trivial household matter, my sister scrolling on her phone with an air of indifference. I placed my bag down quietly, expecting the usual dismissal. But something inside me had shifted. I didn't need their acknowledgement to validate my progress. I had already seen it in the world around me. I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction, listening to the rain tapping against the window, and feeling the glow of self-recognition deep in my chest. The next weeks brought more subtle victories. A local bookstore approached me to design promotional posters for an upcoming author signing event. They were small projects, but each one allowed me to refine my style, test new techniques, and engage with a broader audience. One morning, as I arranged the posters in the shop window, a customer lingered, studying the designs carefully. "These are beautiful," they said softly. "Did you really make all of these yourself?" I nodded, smiling, feeling that familiar, quiet thrill of recognition. Unlike before, I didn't need applause or fanfare. Seeing someone truly appreciate the work was enough. Even at the grocery store, where I had spent years working part-time, small signs of acknowledgement began to emerge. My manager started consulting me on layout changes, product arrangements, and even minor marketing ideas. It wasn't a promotion, not yet, but it was a subtle shift in perception. For the first time, my opinion mattered in a space where I had once been overlooked. These quiet acknowledgments accumulated into something powerful, a reinforced belief in my abilities and a proof that I could succeed on my own terms. Despite the growing recognition, challenges persisted. Technical issues with software, last-minute changes to client requests, and the occasional miscommunication reminded me that success was never linear. One evening, I stayed up late, frantically reworking a poster when the client emailed with a last-minute addition. My heart sank, frustration prickling at my nerves. But instead of giving in to despair, I took a deep breath, carefully integrated the changes, and sent the final version. The client's response, "Absolutely perfect, Chloe. Thank you so much," felt like a soft, affirming hand on my shoulder. It was a quiet victory, but one that cemented the lesson I had been learning for months. Persistence, not approval, defines success. Personal moments of self-recognition became more frequent. I started maintaining a journal, not of failures or doubts, but of accomplishments, feedback, and small lessons learned from each project. Each entry reinforced the reality that I was progressing, that I was capable, and that the silent victories accumulated into something tangible. When my parents criticized me, I reminded myself of these quiet proofs: the smile of a teen artist I had mentored, the compliment from the bookstore customer, the approval of Mr. Ramirez from the coffee shop. Their opinions no longer dictated my sense of worth. One particularly satisfying project came unexpectedly. A local nonprofit organization asked for help designing a series of fundraising flyers and social media graphics. The work was complex, requiring multiple revisions and careful attention to detail. I spent long evenings immersed in layouts, typography, and color schemes, experimenting until every piece felt polished and professional. When the nonprofit posted the graphics online, they received overwhelmingly positive feedback. Comments from followers praised the designs, asking who had created them and expressing genuine appreciation. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, and for the first time, felt an internal confirmation that my abilities were not just functional, they were impactful. As these quiet victories mounted, I began to notice a subtle change in my family's behavior. My sister, once dismissive, occasionally asked for my input on small design matters for her own social media posts. My parents still voiced criticism at times, but it was less cutting, more begrudging acknowledgement that I was, in fact, capable of achieving something. I didn't crave their praise, but observing even minor recognition was a reminder of how far I had come. I had emerged from the shadows they had cast, and though they hadn't changed entirely, I no longer needed them to define my value. The sense of autonomy was liberating. I could now wake up each morning and choose how to shape my day, what projects to prioritize, and how to measure success. Quiet victories became a language of empowerment, a way to track growth, overcome self-doubt, and prove to myself that I was not a failure. Each completed design, every mentoring session, every subtle nod of acknowledgement was a brick in the foundation of a life I was actively building. One evening, after a particularly long day juggling projects and work, I sat at my desk with a cup of tea, reviewing my portfolio. It was astonishing to see the progression. The evolution from the first simple flyer for a friend's fundraiser to fully realized professional quality designs for businesses and nonprofits. I traced my finger over the pages, each image a quiet monument to perseverance, resilience, and courage. I realized that I didn't need a public announcement to celebrate these accomplishments. The proof existed in the body of work itself. Even the smallest gestures carried weight. A local cafe owner asked if they could display a few of my posters on their walls. A teen I had mentored sent a thank you note, including a sketch inspired by one of my tutorials. A regular customer at the grocery store nodded with recognition when they saw me carrying my portfolio. These seemingly minor acknowledgments combined to create an undeniable truth. I had created impact, shaped perceptions, and built credibility without needing loud validation. The culmination of these quiet victories occurred during a small community showcase. I had been invited to display my work alongside other local designers. The event was modest, but the significance was monumental. Families, friends, and community members wandered through the exhibition, stopping to admire the designs I had poured hours, patience, and heart into. Several people approached me, asking about my process and expressing genuine curiosity. The feeling of quietly earning respect, of letting my work speak for itself, was indescribable. Late that night, as I packed up my portfolio and walked home, the city lights reflecting off the damp pavement, I felt a deep, unshakable sense of satisfaction. I had proven something vital, not through confrontation or loud declarations, but through consistency, skill, and quiet determination. The girl who had once felt invisible, silenced by constant criticism, had emerged, not with fanfare, but with undeniable proof that she was capable, resilient, and valued. In my bedroom, sitting at my desk surrounded by sketches, prints, and notes, I reflected on the journey. Every rejection, every criticism, every minor failure had shaped me into someone who could rise above shadows, embrace her talent, and quietly claim victory in her own terms. The applause I craved had never come from my family. It had come from my actions, my dedication, and the subtle acknowledgement of the world around me. I had learned that true proof doesn't need to be broadcast. It doesn't require validation from those who doubted you, or from a world that rarely notices quiet effort. Proof exists in the cumulative weight of persistent effort, in the tangible results of dedication, in the moments when others recognize your work, even in passing. That, I realized, was the quiet victory I had been chasing all along. And as I turned off the desk lamp and looked out at the darkened street below, I understood. I was no longer defined by failure. I was defined by action, by growth, and by the quiet victories that had slowly but surely proven my worth both to myself and to the world.